You're listening to Parenting Our Future with certified parent coach Robbin McManne, author of The Yelling Cure and founder of Parenting for Connection. My podcast is all about providing you with the tools and solutions you need in your parenting so you can create the family you always wanted. Hello, it's Robbin McManne here. Welcome to another episode of Parenting Our Future. I am here with two really amazing women who I so respect, and I've just been talking to them both, and I love everything that they stand for and everything that they're talking about. I am so honored to introduce you to Fern Johnson and Marlene Fine, who are the authors of a book called Let's Talk Race, A Guide for White People. So I want to welcome you both, and I want to tell the audience just a little bit about these beautiful women. They are the moms to two adult Black men that they adopted, and we're going to hear all about their adoption story. And both of them had careers as professors where they were studying through their research and through their work race and communication, and they have a really unique story. And I think it's really important that we talk about it and that we learn from them because they have a lot to share. So welcome both Fern and Marlene. I'm so happy to have you.
Great, thank you. We're happy to be here. We're so happy to be here, and you have such a fascinating podcast. And so
thank you.
Great for you, and we're happy to be part of it.
Well, I am so happy. Thank you. So you have been in this world of studying race, studying communication, and so here you are looking to have a family. And so and there's so much that we're going to talk about, and I'm going to sort of start there, if that's okay. So can you sort of tell me the story of how you came to be moms to two Black boys?
Sure. Absolutely. So we had talked a little bit about having a family and weren't sure about whether we could do this. And by this point, I was, I think, 39, Fern was 42. And we started to talk about it, but we weren't sure. And we were on vacation in Italy on the Adriatic Sea in a small town that was filled. It was August, so it was vacation time for Italians. And it was filled with Italians who had come from little towns in Italy. And it was whole neighborhoods and families. And every day you'd go to the beach and you would rent a chair and you'd be in the same chair every day. So we'd go to the beach and we'd see these families lined up along the shore with all these children. And the children would have a wonderful time. They'd be running around and doing things. And every adult took care of every child. There wasn't a sense of the ownership of a single adult of a child. And we began to talk about a kind of different vision of what it would be like to have children, that we wouldn't be alone in this. We lived and worked in a place that we did not have access to family. And so we knew that we couldn't call up our moms and say, gee, we need a babysitter today.
Yeah.
That wasn't going to happen for us. So thinking about having a community really helped us focus. So we decided when we got back, we would start to pursue adoption. And we went with a private agency. As two lesbians, public agencies really weren't available to us. So we had a private agency that we worked with, and we were not out as a couple, but it was kind of understood that we were. And initially we started looking at international adoption. The Black Social Workers of America were on record publicly then as saying that the adoption of Black children by white parents was a form of genocide because they believed that white parents could not, cultural genocide.
Cultural genocide, yes.
You could not instill a sense of Black culture, Black history, and a strong racial identity for your child as a white person. And so as academics, we were very respectful of that position, and we decided we would not adopt a Black child. But we were open to a child of different race, different ethnicity from overseas. So we started there and began to encounter obstacles. In the Philippines, you had to be Catholic. In other countries, you had to be married. In other countries, you had to be married for X number of years, and so on. In the meantime, as we did the process in Massachusetts, we had to go through a series of counseling sessions. And Fern went to a counseling session one night and
So
changed.
part two. So I go to the counseling session, very clearly resolved, that we are not going to adopt a Black child in respect of Black social workers' statement. And, we understood that statement. And
respected it, obviously.
Yeah, we respected it. So the social worker who's in charge of this session, it's a group session, is giving pretty much an overview on the different kinds of programs they have. And you can do international here or there, but there's a variety of people there. She talks about then their domestic program. It was an international agency primarily, but they had a domestic program. They were getting increasingly into that. And as she talked about that, she then began to talk about white people adopting Black children, so it's like, oh. And I thought, okay, well, we're settled on that. Then she comes out with all of this data about the foster care system and the children waiting in foster care, who they are, what their race, ethnicity is. And if I remember correctly, at the time, the ratio of Black children to white children who were in the foster care system, whatever age they were, was 8 to 1. So 8 Black children for every 1 white child. And then with 8 to 1. And then within the Black children's grouping, the ratio was the same for boys and girls. 8 Black boys to every 1 Black girl.
Whoa.
There was some reason she talked about for why that existed, which is kind of another point. But it turned my head around. My thinking was like, okay, how can I step back and say, I'm going to reject adopting a child who's likely, and she told us this too, what the probability of staying in foster care and not getting adopted by anybody would be. I mean, they were not pushing this, but they wanted people to think about it. So, I talked to Marlene and we said, we need to rethink this whole thing. And it was very hard. And we talked, I think, to every Black person we knew to just get some viewpoints about this. We were not discouraged, not that everybody said all positive things, but we definitely were encouraged by a number of friends and, got some sobering comments about what it would mean, which was realistic. So when we were asked a question about whether this issue of race was something we were concerned about, our answer changed. And now the answer was, no, we're open to any race, any ethnicity, gender, doesn't matter.
Right. So you went from, can I just say you went from respecting what the Black Social Workers of America said, which was white people don't adopt a Black child because you will kill the Black culture, right? Essentially, to saying, but the foster system is full of children. 8 to 1 of them, 8 kids to 1 are Black. And then within that grouping itself, 8 to 1 are boys. And you're saying, well, but how can I ignore that? This is exactly what we need to do, right? So, I mean, keeping culture in mind, but at the same time, if they have a horrible childhood, that culture is gone anyway, right? They've lost that culture anyway, right?
They never have a family. And, there were very good reasons why there were difficulties with, and there were a lot of Black people who were adopting Black children. But, there was a numbers issue, and then a lot of obstacles for how structures were set up in states about who can adopt and how many square feet of living space, all these things.
Yeah.
No, seriously.
Seriously,
this is-
there's no question that there is systemic racism built into the adoption system in the United States. And so there are lots of reasons why Blacks in the US, even though they want to adopt, don't get the opportunity to adopt. And Blacks actually adopt in percentages that are equivalent to adoption percentages for whites. So Black families are very concerned about Black children. But the issue is there simply aren't enough families to adopt all of the children who are in foster care.
Wow. Okay. So then you have fast forward to you adopting 2 boys, right? And how old were they when you adopted them?
Our oldest, Will, was 4 weeks, and our younger son, Julius, was 4 months.
Oh, that's awesome. That's
Yeah.
so great. That's so great. And I love it. I love that you have these 2 boys and they're now adults. They're in their 30s. And so I'm curious, and I'm going to just say this now because I'm not an expert in the area of race or communication. And so there are things that I may get wrong as I ask you questions. So, you know, we talked about this just before we recorded, that I feel somewhat ignorant, and I'm going to do my best to make sure that I say things the right way. And so I hope that I do that. And please correct me if I say something wrong.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
And I think this is the whole reason why you have the book that you have, because you really want to normalize and educate people like me with a willing heart who may just not know what I don't know, right?
Exactly. Our purpose in writing the book is to really get whites to engage in the conversation, to have deep conversations about race, and to not feel embarrassed, to not feel afraid, to not worry about political correctness, but to say we need to educate ourselves and to enter into conversations with that education, with the background that allows us to engage in conversation.
And to use these conversations to understand where our racial ideas come from. And I think, you know, in relationship to what we're talking about with you today, how this impacts the development of children, you know, how they feel about their identity in the world, the opportunities, the prospects that they have. These are all things that are related at the deep core of where all of these attitudes and beliefs in our society come from. And, you know, we need to unearth these in a way that's not always easy, you know, in conversation. But we got to get to the point of not being overly cautious. You know, we need, you know, we can read a lot and we can learn a lot that way, but we have got to talk to people.
Yeah.
You know, white people, Black people, you know, people of Asian heritages. I mean, we have got to talk about race.
Yeah, we do. So so let's talk about race then. Let's talk about it, because, you know, one of the things that was, that I think that was vital to your experience too is in your careers as professors, as academics. You did a lot of studying in race and communication. And so how does language play a part in racism or communicating race? How does that work?
Oh, well, I'll try a couple of different ways of answering that. First of all, there is the language we use on an everyday basis. You know, we learn to use language in the environment with the people that we live with. Families are very central to that because, of course, that's where the child is. So you're learning to speak the language in the context of other people. So, you know, most people know about, oh, there's accent, you know, you come from this part of the country of this accent.
Yeah.
You know, maybe if you're from Canada, you might say the word A-B-O-U-T differently, but not all Canadians, you know. You might.
I think I say about in a very non-Canadian way, but there are those that say about.
Yes, yeah, there's a boot, and, you know, there's in the US, you know, there's, you know, park your car in the Harvard yard, you know, So we know about regional dialects and what have you.
Right.
But then there are also ethnic and racial varieties of speaking.
Right.
So one of the things about language that has been very important in terms of race is that there is a variety, a group of varieties that are called African American English. And, you know, it's what, you know, African Americans in different ways, different regions of the country, you know, have spoken in their communities for years. And it's a little different. Well, Standard English pronounced this many decades ago as inferior language, as fractured, as grammatically incorrect, as inappropriate for educated people. And that had a deep impact on young children in school who were always corrected if they spoke any version of African American English. Now, this started to change, you know, in, I don't know, the 1960s, 1970s, a little bit in terms of research, but it's still there, Robbin, in terms of the kind of denigration of language that, in quote, sounds Black.
And what's important to recognize is that linguistic researchers discovered that, in fact, African American English, African American vernacular is a structured language. It has a linguistic system. There are rules that you follow. And so to infer that it is deficient because it is different from Standard English is wrong. And it's also very hurtful, very dangerous for children to experience that.
Right. And so is it like saying there is an African American dialect? Like, is that what that is?
Well, it is. A lot of this is part of dialect study. It's a little broader than that because there are also cultural norms. There's a very famous Black linguist. Her name is Geneva Smitherman. And she was probably the first person, she was from the University of Michigan, who talked about in the United States the carrying forward of the importance of the word, and that, you know, speaking is so important in honoring your words, you know, that what you say is a cherished part of your connection to other people. Your word is your bond, which is actually a phrase that Michelle Obama has used a number of times in speaking to talk about the importance between trust and connection between people. So there are, you know, larger elements in addition to, you know, the dialect elements about what language and communication means to people.
I keep thinking back to, I think it's in the 90s where there was a push to in a community that I don't remember, but it was Ebonics.
Oh,
Oakland.
yes, yeah, Oakland,
Right?
California. Yeah, and Geneva Smitherman was actually an expert who was brought in to testify and to talk about it. And so, you know, the idea is not that African American vernacular or other dialects are things that you would say to a child, this is okay for you to use throughout your education and in the professional world. But it is important to recognize the integrity of it, you know, as a language form that has various rules, and that as you begin to teach Standard English to a student, that you not deny the importance and the viability of the language that they're using. Or there are some forms of African American dialect that we see expressed by very educated professional individuals that they carry through. And it's really important for white people to recognize that and to not say, oh, gee, there's something wrong with it.
They missed a lesson about how to say X, you know?
Right.
Oh, this person just said X instead of ask.
Right, ask and ask. Yeah.
And, you know, you hear that from, you know, highly educated Black experts in a variety of areas. They might be giving a talk and you're listening to them, and they sound pretty much like Marlene or me or you. And then acts. I asked my colleague, and you can almost like know that someone's going to say, oh goodness, what happened there? Well, it's there. It's important. It is an identifying mark of who you are. So you communicate your identity by how you speak, as well as people judging your identity.
And it's not an incorrect form of ASK. It is in fact a form that is used within the dialect, and it has a history, that you can trace back. And so it becomes important to recognize it as a cultural marker, and to not then assume, oh, that's a person who, doesn't know how to speak. But all too often we do that. And of course, the irony is that, there's so many whites in the US who have their own, incorrect forms. But we're also quick to make judgments about other people right now.
It is so true. And the more you talk about this, the more my head is like wanting to explode, because it's a lot of information. It sounds really complicated. And then I look at the two of you raising two Black boys. So how did you navigate that? How did you preserve and protect the culture while raising them, while being able to just relax into raising them as two white women?
Well, we can answer that in a couple of ways, but just a quick first answer, which relates to what we've just been talking about. So given where our sons grew up, the schools they went to, their family, what have you, they are not speakers of Black English vernacular. Doesn't mean that they don't. No, they're not. Doesn't mean that they don't understand it. But that said, they are often told, and have been told over the years, that people are surprised because you don't sound Black, as though every Black person is supposed to sound the same way.
I had a very interesting experience when our older son, Will, was still an infant. So he was about 6 weeks old. He'd been with us for about 2 weeks, and we were invited to a party. It was an academic party. It was on a college campus. And so we brought William with us, and I'm holding William, and I became engaged in a conversation with a Black man who was French. He was from France, and he was a producer for National Public Radio. So we're having this conversation, and he's asking about Will, and I'm like filled with angst, so I'm pouring my heart out that I don't know how I am going to provide a culture for my child that will be representative of African American life in the United States. And I'm going on and on about this. And he just looked at me at some point and he said, "You Americans are so strange. Why do you assume that all African Americans have the same experiences? Black people around the world, Black people throughout the United States have very different experiences. So don't assume that there is one cultural experience that you have to give your child. You will create something in your family that is representative of your family."
Which will include
yes,
that you have Black people and you have white people in your family. So I remember one of the first things, Robbin, that Marlene and I were aware of. This is just not about the kids per se. We looked around our house. Hanging on the walls. Well, we better change that now. Not that we're going to throw away, what we have, but we need to now start to be more conscious of making our home look like a place where Black people and white people live here.
Right. Our children needed to see themselves reflected. Whether it was the art on the walls and the figurines that we had, but they needed to see themselves. We already had, again, because we were academics who studied race, we had large collections of books by Black authors and about issues of race. We both loved jazz, so we had a large collection of jazz recordings, mostly by Black jazz artists. But there really wasn't a whole lot else that really reflected it. So we began to do different things. So for example, together, I'm Jewish and Fern is Lutheran, sort of.
Well, I was raised Lutheran.
And we love to celebrate Christmas because I didn't.
I introduced this tomorrow.
Right, I didn't grow up with it, and so
Right,
we always had a Christmas tree. And Fern had very early in our relationship created a beautiful gold star that went a Jewish star that went at the top of our Christmas tree. So our first Christmas with Will, a friend gave us the black angel that had always adorned her family Christmas tree. And so that became the top of the Christmas tree, and the star moved down, it stayed, but the black angel went up. And then we realized we had no ornaments of color. I mean, you know, white Santa Clauses and white angels.
So you start to realize
yeah,
we had never, you look around at various things and the images are white. So, you know, every Christmas tree ornament that had like a person image on it.
yes, yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah,
Right. So we thought, okay, we have to get some other things for this tree. And actually the first time that we were able to buy some ornaments, we were at a conference in Chicago. And we, you know, little escape from the conference, and we were shopping.
yeah.
And we were in Marshall Fields. Well, of course, Chicago has a substantial Black population and has for a very long time.
And a substantial Black middle class population. Yeah.
So, you know, we're wandering around and we kind of wind up in wherever, and it's right before, it's in November. So there's Christmas displays. And we spot this tree, and there are all these ornaments on it that are Black, like, you know, Black angels. And so we quickly, you know, bought a couple, and, you know, over the years, you know, found out different ways to add to that. So, so little things like that.
Little things like that. And then, you know, as the boys got older, we did, you know, we'd encourage them. For example, in grade school, one of the boys had to do a project on someone famous. And so he selected Jackie Robinson and did a project and began, you know, to learn about Jackie Robinson and breaking the color line in baseball.
We learned quite a bit about Jackie Robinson too. That
we had no idea.
No.
Right. When our sons did the ubiquitous family tree project.
Oh yeah.
Do they do that
in Canada?
In Canada, you know, it's like, oh, and you know, this is a really difficult project for adopted children to do, because it makes assumptions about your knowledge of your birth family. Or the assumption that your only family is your adopted family. So we used it as an opportunity to get our sons to learn more about the history of slavery and about, since they didn't know anything about their birth families, things they might learn about what their ancestry might look like. And so they turned their project into not just looking at their adopted family tree, but also what might have been their ancestry tree. Through slaves, they learned a tremendous amount, and we learned a tremendous amount through that.
And we also, you know, were in a group of families from the time they were little, all the way forward, of white parents who had adopted Black, brown children. And it was small enough so that the children knew each other. And we got together, you know, like 4 times a year. It was kind of like fall, winter, spring, summer. We would have an event. We didn't all live in exactly the same place, and the older they got, the more complicated. But they always knew that there were some other families that looked like theirs.
And one of the things that we did every year was have a Kwanzaa celebration. So the families would get together with the kids and we would do Kwanzaa. And so, you know, there are ways that you build the culture in. We decided to raise our children in the Jewish faith. And so when they were each bar mitzvahed, we luckily belonged to a Reform congregation with a rabbi who was really open to our bringing in aspects of African American culture to the bar mitzvah. And so we had African American spirituals that were sung, did some research and discovered that there were some shared spirituals between Jews and African Americans. And so we were able to include those.
There are Ethiopian Jews. There are many Ethiopian Jews.
Really? Ethiopian Jews?
Yes. Marlene's mother bought our son's Ethiopian yarmulkes. Gorgeous
Really?
yarmulkes.
Which they wore for their bar mitzvahs. We were able to have friends read poetry by Black poets as part of the bar mitzvahs. And so, you know, there are ways that you create a shared family culture that also represents your child's racial and ethnic culture.
Right, right. I have a beautiful friend who has adopted a boy from Ethiopia. And yes, and so they are very, you know, they've gone back and he's, you know, there's more than one type of child who is adopted. There's, you know, true orphans, and then there's economic orphans. This boy, more of an economic orphan, so his dad is still alive, right? So he was able to go back and see them, but you know, they're really focused on, you know, doing you know, language lessons and dance lessons, you know, different things just to bring the culture in, right? They have a whole wall full of Ethiopian photographs that they've taken when they were there, and so I see that now, and I just think, my friend is so beautiful that she's so, I mean, they both are, the two of them, the mom and dad, are really beautiful, but it just like makes me have a burst of love even more for them, knowing the dedication they have for this child. And for you too, this is so beautiful for you to intentionally do that for your boys is huge, to make them feel, you know, not only welcome for who they are, but and welcome and educated for where they've come from, right? So that's beautiful, and so interesting about those angels and those Christmas ornaments. Like, I
also broadened us and enriched us in ways that it's just difficult to explain the magnitude of, you know, how this whole long experience changed us and made us see the world so differently and value things that we might never have even encountered before. So you know, it's a reciprocal thing.
Yeah. So what did you learn? What you know, when you just talk about, you know, things for you to value, like what was that? What are some of the biggest lessons that and the most surprising things that you've learned?
Well,
start with that one.
So I can start a little bit with that, because I think some of the surprising things and the biggest things that we learned shift us away from the kind of celebration that we've just been talking about to really learning about racism in ways that were really surprising to us. So here we are, we're academics, we're not that young anymore. We've been teaching race in our classes for a long time. We think we know a tremendous amount about it. And then we adopt 2 Black boys, and life really begins to change.
A lot.
And lots of experiences. I'll start by talking about one big thing that we learned about that people now talk about all the time, and has really become a kind of flashpoint, I think, in Black-white conversations. We learned about white privilege very early in our experience.
We knew about it academically. We taught it.
We taught it.
Yeah, we both gave our students readings and we talked about it. And so, you know, we were sure we understood what white privilege was. And we learned very quickly we didn't. So just a couple of quick examples. We'd be out walking with William initially, and here we are, 2 white women, we have a Black child. People would come up to us and say, "You are such wonderful people. You have adopted this child, you're such good, wonderful people." And we'd look at each
Oh, and
other.
he's so lucky.
He's so lucky.
He's so lucky.
Oh, yikes.
So, we'd look at each other and we'd
Which
say,
is
first of all,
beautiful, but
they don't know us. How do they know we're good people? We might be horrible people. And if it were reversed, if it were a Black woman or two Black women walking a white baby, they'd be the nannies, right?
Assume it was
Right.
the nanny.
Nobody'd be coming up and saying what wonderful people you are, how lucky your child is. Then fairly early on, when Will was about a year old, I went to get his Social Security card. So I had, applied for it, and I had to go to the Social Security office, and I was on sabbatical at the time. So I wasn't dressed up in work clothes. I was in jeans. I go into the office, and it is, the kind of full service government office. And I take my number and I go sit, and I'm sitting with my Black child. And I get called up to the desk, and this white woman looks up, looks at me, and looks at William and says, "Oh, you here for your welfare check?" I am a tenured college professor,
Whoa.
And no, I'm not here for my welfare check. I'm here to pick up my son's Social Security card. But I all of a sudden understood that the privilege that I had as a white person, and that, having a Black child, I no longer had, but my son didn't have privilege. That was gone.
When they were little, our privilege as white people could cover them in many situations.
I can imagine, yeah.
And where we were. Of course, as they got older, that was not the case anymore, because you spend less and less time with your kids. They have a life that's increasingly not part of your life, even if you want it to be. That ends, which is, it doesn't end completely, but it really changes. The shift changes.
Right, I can
imagine. Which is why, going back to the issues about creating a strong racial identity when children are very young is really important, because whatever that strength is or isn't is the resource to be drawn on when a white person's privilege no longer is protecting them.
Was that a rude awakening for the boys?
Well, a rude awakening for the boys. It was a rude awakening for us as they got older. When they were young, people would say they were cute, right? And how lovely they were, and how wonderful it was for us to have this family. But as they got older and were on their own, all of a sudden they are young Black men who are seen as dangerous or suspicious. And so, I think at times it was difficult for them. We wouldn't let them, for example, take the train into Boston with their white friends when they were just very, young teenagers, because we thought that was too dangerous for them. We discovered one day in conversation with the Black parents of our younger son's, one of his classmates, they had an older son who was just about the right age to get a driver's license. And so we were chatting with them one day and said, is he getting his license soon? And the two parents looked at us and said, no, he is not ready. And we said, what do you mean? And they said, we've been teaching him about how to respond if he's pulled over by the police, and we don't think he knows how. And we're not letting him get a license until he does. We didn't know until that moment that we had to have a conversation with our sons before they started driving.
Right.
We then had to have that conversation.
Yeah, when in a previous podcast episode that I did on white privilege with Jen Lumenland, that's what we talked about, that you have, that the white privilege we have is never having to have that conversation. Whereas that's a normal conversation to have in a Black family. And even my friend that I keep talking about, and I mentioned it in that podcast episode as well, that, you know, I remember her telling me that she had to have a conversation with her son to say, you know what, at some point you can't wear your hoodie up over your head because that will look suspicious to other people. And I thought, no.
Yes.
I mean, how ignorant, right? I mean, I just didn't know what I didn't know. And what Jen was saying is the scariest thing for, and I mean, I don't want to make a huge broad statement, but for white people is an out of control Black male.
Sure.
Even if it's a child, right? Even if it's a young child, right?
Yes, yes. Well, the research in schools, I mean, Black children, and especially Black boys, get suspended at much higher rates than white boys. But if you're actually looking at their behaviors, they're not different. But the Black child is deemed as out of control and dangerous. Scary. Yeah.
Okay, so then what do we do, right? This is why you have your book. So what do we do? How do we change the way we talk to our kids? I've got 2 teenage boys, 15 and 13. And yeah, they're beautiful boys.
Dynamic.
Yes. And there's a lot going on here in my house.
We remember those days.
On a day-to-day basis, yeah. And, you know, I want to raise good men. Like, every parent wants to raise great people. So what do we do? What do we need to make sure we're doing? Because this is what your book is all about. So thank you for writing it. And thank you for, helping people like me.
Well, we need to talk about race in our families. And that doesn't matter what race you are. I mean, you know, white parents of white children need to talk about race in their family situation, and not just when there's a racial crisis or another Black person has been killed by the police. It needs to be a conversation that's normalized. You know, this is our country. Our country has many different kinds of people. You know, we have Black people, we have, you know, Latinx people, we have people of many Asian backgrounds, and increasingly our country is more of this mix, and we need to talk about it, we need to recognize it, we need to stop, you know, get the words out of our vocabulary about that person is different. I mean, we are all different from one another, but that's the reality. It's not that there's just some people who are different. So, you know, I think that's part of it, so that kids get used to hearing their parents, even if their parents aren't talking to them, they're just talking to each other, that race is a variable thing, that race and ethnicity, multifaceted, and all people are not the same, they don't look the same, they don't do the same things. And that's important, I think.
And it's okay to talk about it. You know,
so can I say something? So here's the thing, though, as look, for me, as what I would consider a conscientious person, raising my boys when they're little, and we have those little people dolls. Some of them are brown, some are white, or whatever color they're yellow, whatever color they are. Not even. And so my answer to the race question was to not even mention it, to not even.
Oh, sure.
Yes, absolutely.
So that's not what you want to do. You want to so can you walk us through how you would really, you know, is this the brown child? Like, how do you do that? Like do you know what I mean?
Depends on the age. Yeah.
Let me just say one thing before the age issue, because I do understand exactly what you're talking about. And I think that sometimes that is the right approach. But if you don't talk about race, don't think that your child is not going to encounter it out there in whatever situations they're in. They're going to encounter it in school, certainly, regardless of what their race or ethnicity is. I mean, we were surprised to learn when our kids were in college and talking, with friends who had come to our house, their friends who were at our house, that some things that happened in high school. Now, this is a very progressive community with a very positive, set of social values. They learned about things that happened in high school that they never told us about. And because kids don't always tell you about things, but if they think everything's just fine and there are no differences, it's a very delicate balance. But then what happens when they go out of the family situation and now they're faced with something?
And you haven't really prepared them, is what you're saying.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Whether they're white or black or Chinese American or Puerto Rican, whatever,
Right. So I can say some things about ways to talk to your children at different stages, as they're growing. But I also think it's really important for adult white people to recognize that we have to take some responsibility for our own learning, so that we in fact are prepared as we teach our children, and that we're ready to talk about race. So I'll put that aside for the moment, but I do think that's a really important component of this. But in thinking about kids, little kids just see color, so like the little toys, that's what they see. They see some people who are brown and some people who are white. Or as one of our sons once said to me as we were washing our hands, and he had heard us talk about black and white people, and he looked at our two hands and he said, "Well, Mom, you're pink, you're not white, and I'm brown, I'm not black." And he was correct in saying this. And one day when I was picking up William from daycare, there was a little black girl. He's the older of our sons, and I'm walking out, and she looked up and she said, "Who are you?" And I said, "Oh, I'm Will's mom." And she said, "You can't be." And I said, "Why not?" And she said, "You're white, he's black." And I thought for a minute, what do I say here? And I just looked at her. "Oh, he's adopted." And she said, "Oh, okay." Because at that age, there was nothing malicious about what she was thinking. It's just color, your different colors. And so to at least acknowledge that with young kids, and that it's okay for them to say something about it, not to say, "Shush, don't say that." Don't say, "Oh, that's a black person." Shh, don't, that's wrong. Yeah, that's a black person. That's fine. That's good.
So let's not overthink it. Let's just be
Just
honest about it.
For little kids. Then as kids get older, by the time they're about 6 to 10 and they develop, their cognitive skills, they're able to do some perspective taking, take the perspective of the other. Then they start to make some inferences. They look at inferred characteristics of people. They look around where they live perhaps and say, "Gee, all the people who live in big houses are white. All the people who have money are white. Gee, all the black people I see are poor." And so they begin now to make these statements. They're not really making judgments yet, but they're making statements. And so it's really important at that age to begin to introduce them to history, so that they better understand how these things begin to happen. What's the history of black people in the United States, for example. And they can begin to learn more. They can begin to learn about cultures and cultural differences. And these things then become part of their experience as they start to see these things in the world around them.
Mediated communication becomes very important. Well, it's just there. I mean, it's so much part of our lives. And, Marlene and I have talked about the media images of people of color since the pandemic started. So we have, for example, never seen as many experts on media, on television, news, cable, it's like, oh, isn't this amazing? How many scientific experts can talk about this virus? How many intellectuals who are brought on to talk about, structural racism. And it's like, oh, okay, well, these individuals have been here,
Yeah, and you're talking they're Black, right? You're saying that the number has increased, right?
And how good that is for kids to see.
The images, it's like, oh, okay, see, here's a whole different view.
Yeah, and
who's the expert?
Right, and the converse of that is these are also the ages where your kids are watching a lot of Disney, for example, or other mediated images where they're seeing not positive images of people of color. And so it becomes important. I mean, we don't believe that you take those things away from your children. Disney is an experience for kids, but it is important to watch it with them and to talk about what they're seeing on the screen so that they don't come away with these assumptions about who they're seeing on the screen and the inferences they're making about, oh, Black people talk funny, the hyenas, or
yikes.
Just all of these things that it's so important
oh my gosh
to talk to their kids about. And those are really important ages. And then of course, as kids get older, at around 10 or so, they go beyond the inferences to actually understanding stereotypes
and really
conceptualizing that, because they are then at an age where they begin to think about how other people are seeing them. And so they are also making judgments about the people they see. And it becomes really important for parents then to begin to talk about stereotyping and unpack those stereotypes with
them.
If
your kids aren't listening, you think?
Yeah.
They don't want to talk to you.
They're hearing it.
They're hearing it. Even if they don't participate in the conversation and you have something to say to them, it's gone in.
Well, and it's all about how you model as well, right? And how you act, your own microaggressions that all of those things that you hear about. And I have to say, it is exciting, and it is it feels like we are moving to a new place where we are that there is so much more inclusion. Do you see that too? I mean, you just mentioned that on in terms of like TV news broadcasts, but are you seeing that in general? I feel like I'm seeing it.
Sure, yeah, and there's also an increase which is been measured of the number of people who identify as multiracial and interracial couples. And this will have a major influence on all of these issues, and it's important. It's a very important population trend, and it's being monitored. I mean, not in the sense of control, but I mean, we can see the differences. And when in the U.S., when the information finally comes out on this last census, there's going to be another big jump in people who identify as multiracial by their background and who are, coupled who are in multiracial relationships.
So I think we're in a very fraught time right now. So at the same time that all of those positive changes are happening, we're seeing, I think, in response to that, in the US, a real growth in white supremacy and white supremacist thinking.
And the outing of white supremacy.
And the outing of it.
Just like it's okay to be a white supremacist now.
Yeah. And I think one of our great fears, and one of the reasons, again, why we believe people need to talk to each other, is that much of the white supremacist thinking that is like deeply ingrained in our culture, if we don't have conversations and we don't begin to talk, that will just remain there unspoken. Or you want to talk a little bit about the Chauvin trial and the tropes that are being used?
Oh, yeah, we were talking
Yeah,
about.
let's talk about that. Yeah, so the Chauvin trial is what you just
Yeah,
mentioned.
so this is going on, and the prosecution is presenting their case. They're still presenting their case. And of course, Derek Chauvin, deserves a robust defense, as anybody accused of something does. But what's happening is you can look at it from the prosecution standpoint and say, okay, they've got one after another witnesses who are speaking very clearly about this being done to him, and it was not right for various reasons,
Right.
and
Various reasons. Yes.
for various reasons. You've got, bystanders, who are like horrified watching this happen to him. Now, medical people who are talking in very specific terms. So you've got all that. You can say, case looks to be going really well.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you flip it, the defense is, now this is not a legal commentary, this is a cultural commentary. The defense is going to keep pounding and pounding and pounding. He was a drug addict. This happened because he had fentanyl in his system. He was a big, strong Black man.
Mm-hmm.
These are the racial tropes.
Yeah.
Even if you look at this trial and say, we need justice for George Floyd, and this is going well, those racial tropes are in the news every day, because that's basically the argument of Derek Chauvin's defense attorneys.
Right.
Yeah, and the same thing is happening as he, questions witnesses and attempts to make, a young Black woman seem to be emotionally out of control. And so it goes through witness after witness, and it's a calling on these stereotypes, these racial tropes that are so deeply ingrained and that we don't question. And so you hear them and you just say, oh yeah, that's right, George Floyd was dangerous. And so the police were justified in what they did.
Because their defense is about.
Right. So, one of the things as white people that we have to do is that we have to learn about that and begin to understand how deeply ingrained these cultural assumptions are. We need to learn about white privilege. We need to develop empathy for Black experience, which we tend not to have. We live, I don't know the statistics in Canada, but in the United States, neighborhoods are segregated and schools are segregated just because neighborhoods are segregated. And so, whites tend to live in communities that are white. They are educated in schools that are white. They have friendship circles that are white. We live our lives with other white people. And so we don't really understand or see the experiences that Black people have, and how important it is for us to talk to each other so that we learn what those experiences are.
Yeah, and I will say Canada is no different. There is systematic racism, especially when it comes to our Native, our Aboriginal community.
Yeah.
It is horrific. The history and the mistreatment of these beautiful people. And we are very multicultural here. And I grew up with, I hate to say it, but my parents were racist, in a way where it was okay, and I'm using air quotes, okay. It was like, oh, the hunkies, or that's the first thing that comes to mind.
I relate to that completely. I mean, my father was definitely racist. Yeah. Fine Christian man,
Right? Yeah.
Who was definitely racist.
Yeah. I was just saying, I grew up with parents who didn't do that, but their siblings did. So, I had aunts and uncles and cousins, who used language that to me now is simply horrifying.
It's unacceptable. And my sister and I, we both rejected, the way they would talk about things, and it wasn't deep hate, but that's the systematic racism. It's, It's you saying, oh, it's just for fun. Oh, it's no big deal. Actually, it is a big deal.
It is a big deal, exactly.
Right.
Fun for who, so I've tried to make sure that I'm more aware, and I don't know what I don't know, so I'm trying my best to fumble through these interviews with these topics that are hard, and I think that's the whole point, right? We have to learn about why we have privilege as white women. And you hear the Karens, that is,
right.
but anyway, I don't even want to go there. So I, here's the thing. I think as we need to educate each other, right? As white people, we need to listen to what the Black community has been telling us all along, and we need to respect it. And I love that you just said, have empathy for Black experiences. I think that's huge. Be willing to learn and be open to a difference. And boy, does it ever scare me that the rise of the white supremacist right now, and that it's somewhat okay. As my mom is German, and so grew up in Germany, and I just, that is devastating to hear that it's coming back, because that is just so horrible. Yes, so we need you and your book more than ever, and I just, we have a gift for everybody, which is a full chapter of the book. So in what you're giving everybody, you talk about some ways to talk to your kids, and some different ways to really bring this subject to the forefront, because it's important. And like you said, even if in your day-to-day experience you don't experience again, see, I'm stumbling over my words, but situations that are racist, where you either witness somebody being affected by racism, or you do something yourself, we've just got to open it up. We've got to talk about it, and we, regardless, our kids are going to have those experiences away from us, so we should be talking about it at home.
Yes.
Oh, Robbin, I just wanted to mention that the chapter that we provided for you looks like a chapter from our book. It's actually a chapter from our previous book.
Oh, I'm sorry.
On the interracial adoption option. Right. We couldn't give you a chapter from our current book because it's not officially published until the 13th of April. So by contract, we are not allowed to give you.
My mistake. I'm sorry about that. Thank you.
No, that's all right. But I mean, many of the issues in that chapter we gave you from the interracial adoption book are ones that we've actually talked about today. Right. And more directly focused on communication, with your children than some of the content in
Okay, that's great. Yeah, and the book is The Interracial Adoption Option: Building a Family Across Race. Right. And so then that's the previous book. Right. And then this book is Let's Talk Race: A Guide for White People.
Correct.
I love that. It's just like, it's pretty blunt, and just get to it's a guide for you, white people. So well, I have so enjoyed talking to you. Thank you for the work that you're doing. And I still feel like we've only scratched the surface, which I know we have, right?
Yes, so, we have. But it was delightful. Thank you so much.
Great back and forth conversation.
Okay, good. Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for the work that you're doing, and for helping us to helping those of us that don't know better but want to do better.
And thank you for bringing this to a broader audience.
Yes,
appreciate it.
You're so welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to this edition of my podcast, Parenting Our Future. I'm parent coach Robbin McManne, and if you're enjoying this podcast, please share it with someone who you think might also need to hear this message. And don't forget to subscribe, and if you like my work, I would be grateful if you gave me a 5-star rating. For those of you who like my content and want more, visit me at yellingcurebook.com to get your copy of my book and to find other resources to help you. Until next time, I am wishing you and your family peace and connection.